Hi there and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the presence of hundreds of thousands of draft-dodging Ukrainian males in the EU and what kind of approach we should take to that. Now, the war in Ukraine has been going on since February of 2022, and during that time the UN estimates that approximately 6.2 million people have left Ukraine. Of that number, 4.3 million Ukrainians are living as refugees in various European Union countries, or EEA member states anyway, and according to Eurostat, 20.3% of that 4.3 million are military-age Ukrainian males. This gels pretty well with Ukrainian government estimates that around 650,000 Ukrainian males of military age between the ages of 18 and 60 have left Ukraine post-February 2022, so basically after the invasion, and have settled in the EU. And these are males obviously of military age without any disability. It excludes people who are not eligible for the military draft, for example, fathers of 3 or more children and other males. And this figure of 650,000 doesn't include men who left legally and avoided the draft in that way because they perhaps are the fathers of 3 or more children. There's a legal exclusion for those males being drawn into the Ukrainian army, and it also excludes people who left from Russian-occupied areas of the country such as the Donbass or Crimea. So it's basically 650,000 military-age fighting males from the rump part of Ukraine, the part which is under the control of the Ukrainian government, which is enjoying Western and EU support at the moment. Draft dodging isn't uncommon in Ukraine. Recent statistics have revealed that about a third of Ukrainian men are simply not prepared to fight for their country, and there is a kind of market in Ukraine for obtaining illegal documents, forged documents like medical certificates, and people will pay between $7,000 and $10,000 in order to obtain them, and people will pay that amount of money to get out of being drafted and avoid doing military service, to avoid being sent to the front. Obviously, Ukrainian authorities are somewhat less than thrilled about this situation, simply because they are facing severe manpower shortages in the Ukrainian army. They recently had to lower the age of recruitment from 27 to 25 to try to compensate for this. But the Ukrainian army needs more and more personnel, particularly because they're up against not only separatist forces from the Donbass region, etc., but Russian military forces as well, and even now some North Korean troops probably. So the Ukrainian forces are in urgent need of more manpower, and there's a very good reason why there's conscription in the country and why the country has a blanket ban on men of military age leaving the country. It's simply because if they want to stand a chance of winning this fight against Russia, which is an opponent with a superior pool of manpower, then they really need every fighting man that they have. And if some people are absconding overseas, then it clearly isn't helpful. In an effort to address this, the Ukrainian authorities in April of 2024 introduced some new measures which suspended the provision of consular services to men overseas, meaning basically men of military age. Not people who have exemptions, not children or anything like that, but just military age men who have not served in the army and are part of the Ukrainian diaspora, predominantly in EU countries or the UK, places like that. And basically what this means is if these people, these men want to get a new passport, a new identity card, or renew their driving license, or do anything connected with the government of Ukraine, then they actually need to return to Ukraine in order to do that and to regularize their status with the local army conscription center. So basically they would have to return to Ukraine and probably be conscripted into the army. Now obviously they probably don't want to do that because I'm guessing that the reason that they're not in Ukraine right now, one of the dominant reasons anyway, is because they don't want to be conscripted into the army. The argument of the Ukrainian authorities is simply that it's unreasonable for these men to leave the country in a state of desperation and refuse to fight for it, while simultaneously expecting services from the state. And to be honest, I can understand that point of view. I think that this poses major questions for the EU and Western countries, including the UK, that have taken the majority of Ukrainian refugees in, including these male refugees of fighting age. Now, supposedly, we are standing behind Ukraine as staunch allies. We're providing money and we're providing weapons and all kinds of political support through sanctions, etc., etc. So, it's a bit incongruous to find that we are the supposed allies of Ukraine, and yet you have this significant pool of Ukrainian manpower, which has basically fled from Ukraine and has fled to our countries, to places like Portugal and France and Germany and Poland and the UK. And we're just allowing those people to remain here, those Ukrainian refugees to remain here, while Ukraine is basically locked in a life and death struggle with Russia and desperately needs the manpower. To me, this doesn't really strike me as the action of a good ally. It's not something that I would want my ally to do in a war, and an argument is to basically give support to the people who should be helping me but just don't want to, and to allow them to reside in my country safely and securely, and even be in receipt of refugee status and refugee benefits so that they can basically avoid military service and conscription. I think that if the West, if the European states want Ukraine to be victorious in the war, then doing something about this issue is something which should be considered. Now, I know a lot of people would say, oh no, you can't send those guys back, they're conscientious objectors or whatever. Well, if they're conscientious objectors, then that's fine. They can go back to Ukraine and say, I'm a conscientious objector. In a similar vein, I just saw an article in the Portugal Resident about Ukrainian doctors in Portugal. It did mention that most of the doctors were women, so it's not really about fighting men. It's basically saying there are these 50 doctors and they're desperately needed by the SNS, and they just need to pass these Portuguese language exams, and it's very difficult for them. And it was a story about basically how these doctors were really good and they were just being held back by their lack of Portuguese, and maybe the language requirements should be relaxed or something to allow them to serve in the SNS. That was the theme of the article. But it got me thinking, doctors, right? Surely they're needed more urgently in Ukraine than they are in Portugal. Now, I know that the SNS has a shortage of doctors and nurses, just like the NHS does in the UK or whatever, and we do need foreign staff to augment the health service. There's no doubt about that. But can we honestly and seriously say that the condition of our health services in time of peace in Europe are in the same situation as Ukraine? No, I don't think so. It's ludicrous. Doctors are, of course, urgently needed in Ukraine. I mean, they have a war going on. They have a lot of injuries to both soldiers and civilians. Naturally, doctors are not people who we should be encouraging to leave Ukraine and come and live in the EU. Not at this juncture. If anything, I would expect the flow to be the other way. If we were truly good allies of Ukraine, we would be sending doctors and medical personnel there to help them with the huge challenges that they must be facing. I would also like to share just a couple of anecdotal experiences that I've had in my own life with Ukrainians in Portugal. Let's start with the University of Coimbra. I went to language class there, and there was a very nice girl from Ukraine who attended the language class, and she had a Ukrainian boyfriend who was here. Now, they were here prior to the start of the conflict. They were here, summer of 2021, and as far as I know, the boyfriend had some kind of business visa. He was doing some kind of online business, and she was going to study at the University of Coimbra learning the language. Okay, fine. And this guy, the boyfriend, he was not super poor. I mean, he was running his business, he was earning money online in US dollars, and he just bought a brand new electric car at the time that I met him with cash. So he certainly wasn't in dire need. But he acquired refugee status. As soon as the war broke out, basically, in Ukraine, he went for refugee status, and he said something to me about it along the lines of that he had to do that because if he didn't do that, he might have to go back to Ukraine and get some documents or something, and that could be dangerous. Basically, he didn't want to fight. And I get that, I understand that. But it was really strange because this guy was the most pro-Ukraine person I ever met. He was constantly telling people that we should go and protest against Auchan or Decathlon or go to Lisbon and have, protests against Russia in Lisbon. But he wasn't prepared to go back to Ukraine himself and actually do anything physical and, fight for his country. But he just wants to stay in Portugal, claim refugee status, which he really shouldn't have as far as I'm concerned because his situation didn't merit it. And then he's telling everybody else what they should do to help his country. At the same time, he's doing basically nothing himself. He's not doing what he should do. To be honest, I wasn't really very comfortable with that. In the second instance, I also went to language classes run by the government in Portugal. And in my class, this was a B1 level class, there were numerous people from all over the world, South Americans there, etc., etc. But there were 4 people from Ukraine. There was one Ukrainian woman who was actually there with her daughter, so I suppose it would be 5 people, but the daughter wasn't really in the class, she was quite young. And then, in addition to that, there were 3 Ukrainian guys. And these guys were about late 20s, early 30s. And when they were asked about their profession, they're all mechanics. Well, I'm sure Portugal needs mechanics too, but in time of war, you've got all the military vehicles and everything in Ukraine. I'm sure that the skills of a mechanic would be appreciated. And those 3 were definitely all young, fit guys of military fighting age. And they were all refugees here in Portugal as well. I'm not sure what kind of benefits they're getting as refugees in Portugal. Obviously, some European countries offer more generous benefits than others. But still, come on now. Should Portugal really be encouraging and facilitating these guys of fighting age to basically dodge the draft and come to Portugal and wait out the war? Is that the action of a good ally? In my opinion, it's not. So I think that Western countries, including Portugal, EU members, Great Britain, etc., really need to have a careful think about this situation. Is it really reasonable to allow 650,000 plus young Ukrainian guys to hide out and hang out in the EU on various different kinds of refugee benefits while they're desperately needed by our ally, Ukraine, a country that we're supposed to be supporting as much as we possibly can, and we say that we are. They desperately need this manpower, but they can't get it because much of it is in our countries. Now, I understand that many of these Ukrainians are integrating well into their host countries in the EU, and they have jobs, and they contribute to the economy. I don't think they're bad migrants at all. My point is simply this. If you have a friend and your friend is in need, and you know that there are people who are doing things which they shouldn't do, which are hurting your friend, you shouldn't help them do it, right? And I think that that's what the EU and many Western countries are doing in this instance. And yes, we might get some benefit from it ourselves, but at the end of the day, if Ukraine loses the war because of lack of manpower, amongst other factors, is that really going to benefit Europe? At a minimum, I think European Union countries should probably consider cutting the benefits of male military-age Ukrainian men who have basically dodged the draft in this way. And I also think that an effort should be made to encourage them to return to their home country and basically do the right thing, which is fight for Ukraine. At the end of the day, Ukraine is in a war, and Ukraine has to be the one that will win it or lose it. It doesn't matter, how much military support or money money is given. I mean, if you look at the lessons of like the Vietnam War, for example, or the war in Afghanistan, where factions in those countries were supported by superpowers with huge amounts of weapons, money, and even personnel on the ground. At the end of the day, it was still the country itself, the people in the country, that had to win that war or lose it. And I think that by allowing such a large segment of the Ukrainian fighting age population to basically hang out in the EU and just wait out the war, I don't think that that's very responsible. If we really want to help Ukraine, we say we do, then we should. And this is one of the key measures that could clearly be taken to bolster levels of Ukrainian manpower and give them the much needed impetus to roll back the recent advances that the Russian army has made. Alright, that'll do it for this video. This was just my opinion. I understand it's a controversial issue and that not everybody will agree with me, but I wanted to put it out there and ask people what they thought. I really enjoyed making the video and I hope people will join me for the next one. So see you soon.